The Chargers have a ton of cap space as they enter free agency in 2022. And if they play their cards right, they can come out with some impact starters without having to break the bank. We're going to talk about a few of those options on today's Locked On Chargers podcast.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade. Joined as always, my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers for over 6 seasons. We're heading into our 5th as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys for making us your first listen today. And as always, make sure to not miss the show by following and wherever you get your podcast from for free on all platforms, and subscribing to the new Locked On Chargers YouTube channel. And you guys can hit us up all over the place on social media at Locked On LAC on Twitter to get in on Fan Mail Friday tomorrow, or call into the Locked On Chargers voicemail line at 323-524-7924. So we have free agency coming up very quickly. And on today's show, one of the things we kind of wanted to focus on was the Chargers being able to build through free agency and bringing in impact players, especially in the trenches, that could help them right now without having to break the bank. Guys you could add multiple of in free agency while trying to fill as many holes as you can before the draft comes up. So you have the least needs going into the draft. And Daniel Popper put together a list of 31 free agents he thinks the Chargers might be considering going into the free agency period, with a lot of great stuff from The Athletic, where you should subscribe if you don't already. But we're going to start with the bigger names, David, who would come in at a very reasonable price, like under $10 million, right? That's kind of the range we're talking about here. None of these guys I think we're going to talk about are going to be projected more than that. And one of the guys that Daniel Popper has firmly on his list is a guy that I think could come in and make an immediate impact, but he does come with some concerns, and that's Akiem Hicks, and that's the guy that everyone's been talking about going into this, with the ties to Staley in Chicago, him kind of, being rumored around the trade deadline last season as they were, the Chargers were adding guys like Andre Roberts and Dustin Hopkins. But this is what Popper has to say about Akiem Hicks. Subject to plenty of trade speculations around the deadline in early November, he ended up staying in Chicago. He has all of the, connections with Brandon Staley, but he has dealt with ankle and groin issues last season. But he says when Hicks is on the field, though, he remains a highly productive player. And I think that's one thing about Akiem Hicks, David, as you look, PFF has it as a 2-year, $17.5 million contract, almost identical to what they signed Linval Joseph to. And I think the biggest thing with this is, yes, this guy could come in. You would still have flexibility to go after other players. He fits well in your system, but you are bringing in another aging defensive lineman, right? That comes with its own, parts of it that you would question as far as, do you want to do that again? It worked out better with Linval Joseph than Brandon Mebane, but either way, do you want to kind of add that another aging defensive tackle?
Well, and you know the pedigree that he brings to the table. You know what he's been able to do in his NFL career, and he's been a very, very productive player. But again, he's 32 years old, and that's the one thing that is just like, coming off of a limited season where he's actually the last couple of seasons where he just hasn't been able to play a full season. He's dealt with injuries the last 3 years. But like you said, when he is on the field, he is productive. In those 9 games he played last year, 19 tackles, 17 of those being stops, 5 sacks, and 15 pressures in limited time. That's crazy production to get in the interior of your defensive line. So if this guy is healthy, I think you can reasonably expect a guy who's going to be able to consistently stop the run and provide some pass rush on the interior that the Chargers really have been sorely lacking.
Yeah, and I think at the age of 32, I think he could even come in a little bit less. Like, I think you would probably at least consider maybe, a 2-year, $12 million deal or somewhere in that range, which makes him, pretty much a bargain, I think, at that price and worth the risk. But it also comes along with, but that can't be all you do, because exactly. If you get, 14, 15 games out of him, he's probably going to dramatically improve the Chargers front. He's going to run defense. He's better as a pass rusher than Linval Joseph, right? And Brandon Mebane before him. Gives him somebody who's a presence on the interior. And I think that's why he makes this list, because you can add him and still go out and add someone else. David, who would you kind of put in that same category as a mid-level guy who's not going to break the bank, but will still come in and help you right away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the next big name, at least on this list, that's been thrown around, very, very frequently around, the Chargers and free agency, is a guy who was just playing in the Super Bowl not too long ago, and of course, I'm talking about B.J. Hill. B.J. Hill came in, was a member of the Cincinnati Bengals that they traded for, and came in and really rewarded them right away. I mean, like Popper said in his article, he's young, he's productive, and he is versatile. He had 44 tackles, 29 pressures, 6 sacks, and the best part of all of this, Daniel, is he is 25 years old. So this is a guy who is probably going to be on the higher end of your bargain free agents here that you would be bringing in. But this is a guy I think you could feel really good about. A guy with 20 plus stops in 3 of his 4 seasons in the league, that you know what you're going to get out of him. And the best is also possibly yet to come. So a lot of potential here, a lot of production, and a lot of potential for that production to continue and even improve.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the top guys on my list because not only is he not going to probably break the bank, according to PFF, 3-year, $26.25 million contract, $8.75 million per season. I will take that in a heartbeat. I mean, the
Oh yeah,
concerns are
sign me up.
hasn't been, a full-time starter in a lot of the seasons, but he was a huge impact player on that Cincinnati Bengals defense. And their biggest thing going into the offseason is going to be to find Joe Burrow an offensive line, even if they have to buy it, right? So that's what makes you think
They
maybe he
better.
could become available just because he is a good player. They also have Larry Ogunjobi, who's another guy who is going to get a lot of looks and probably cost a little bit more just because of the sack numbers by itself. But I think BJ Hill is the best of both worlds because you get a guy that you know has been super productive while also getting a guy that you feel like can be the future for the next few years. He's not just a 1 or 2 year guy potentially, right? He could be a guy that really solidifies that for the next few years without having to worry about him getting up there in age. And I mean, has been pretty healthy, which is another thing, pretty durable during his career. So BJ Hill, a guy that I would definitely be considering. I will throw one name out there, and it's Morgan Moses, who Daniel Popper talks about. I mean, that's his most attractive stat. I mean, especially with, everything with Brian Bulaga over the last couple of seasons. Then you look at a guy like Morgan Moses, who's played every game in 7 straight seasons. Like right there, that just has me interested, right?
Yes.
But he has struggled. He's a better run defender than he is a pass blocker, a run blocker than a pass blocker. But at the same time, I think a lot of the struggles that he had specifically last year, where he allowed 49 pressures, that's not very good. But he also had, 4 different quarterbacks back there for the Jets, rookie quarterbacks that were holding on to the ball too long. Either, both of the 2 seasons leading up to that, he hadn't given up more than 40 pressures in a season. And I just think you're giving yourself a much higher floor on that right side, and you're getting a guy who's only 30 at this point, kind of the prime for some offensive linemen. You're not really worried about until like 32, 33 for the most part. And I think is a guy that would stabilize the right side and obviously make Trey Pipkins or Storm Norton a backup.
And that's essentially where they should be, right? I think that's where Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins have shown themselves at this point in their careers. They're not really ready to be the main guy. I mean, you saw what that looked like with Storm Norton, and he played admirably, and he put in a very, very kind of uncomfortable spot. But, he's not a guy that you really want to be out there starting. If you're able to get a Morgan Moses for a decent contract, I think you got to feel good about that option. He has the experience. And I think on an offensive line, that the Chargers have really built on the left side and put some good resources in. There's been a good mix of youth and experience on that offensive line. So I think if you get somebody who is a proven talent on the right side, really be able to give Justin Herbert some more, at least comfort and less anxiety when he tries to roll out to the right side, that he's going to maybe get some better production or protection there. I think that will definitely be a welcome sight. The Chargers obviously need to improve on that right side of the offensive line, and adding somebody in free agency is definitely not a bad way to do it.
No, and I mean, his current projection, at least from PFF, is 3 years, $22.5 million, $7.5 million.
That's not bad at all.
Per season, $14 million guaranteed. You probably don't have very much in that 3rd season, right? It's kind of a 2-year thing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It gives you a chance to kind of build up a new guy. I mean, this guy is an average tackle for the most part, but you would take average, and it'll give you someone stable on that right side in case you want to make Brendan Hymus your starting right guard going into next season. Now you're at least surrounding him with 2 vets. You're not surrounding him with Storm Norton, right? You have Corey Lindsley on one side, On the other side, you have Morgan Moses, who's played a ton of games, and more importantly, every single game the last 7 straight seasons.
Exactly.
Insane. And I just think that would be a nice stabilizing thing, especially to build up the chemistry of a young and impressive offensive line for the Chargers. But there's some more guys I think that fit into this, including another guy who was playing in the Super Bowl. Sebastian Joseph Day is another guy that pops up on this list, and another tackle that could potentially be an upgrade over Storm Norton. So we'll get into those guys. And as far as, these guys we're talking about, David, specifically Morgan Moses, like, I'm not going all in, right? I'm not saying, hey, this is the guy that's going to fix everything, but it's just providing options, right? You don't have to go all in to improve the offensive line from especially the right side that we saw last season. But I am going all in on betonline.net, the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast, and the only place where I place my bets. And especially with football season being over, you need a little bit of juice on some other sports to get the full squeeze out of it. And BetOnline is the best place for that because it's the number one place for all college and pro hoops. You got March Madness coming up right around the corner. And that is, the most insane weekend ever to bet on any kind of sports. March Madness is ridiculous. And I'm excited that I'm in with BetOnline to get in all of my action because you're going to find the best odds, lines, and props at betonline.net. You have so many specials to choose from where you can get in on tournaments and find big winnings, right? And that's what everyone wants. Bet a little, win a lot. You can find those opportunities at betonline.net. And it's not just basketball, right? It's NHL, it's UFC, it's boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. BetOnline.net is the number one place to go for all of your sports news and information and finding out where everyone stands and to find the best bets available. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, David, we're getting into some more free agents here from Daniel Popper, our good friend, and I'm excited to have him on to talk about this list as well. And we're definitely going to try to do that soon because Daniel Popper kills it every time. Subscribe to The Athletic if you haven't already. But getting back to this, David, there's a few other names I think that are exciting that you could potentially bring in while still giving yourself that flexibility to maneuver and fill other spots entering the draft, because you don't want to have to draft from a place of need, right? You can't necessarily go out and buy everything that you need, but it doesn't mean that you can't be smart about it and try to fill as many positions as possible, find starting caliber players in free agency and mix of, mid-level guys that you feel like can come in and produce, and also bargain guys that you're going to have to hit on a couple of those as well. So who did you want to start with in this segment, getting into more guys that could help without breaking the bank?
Yeah, I'm going to leave Sebastian Joseph Day for you because I know he's definitely on your list and he's a popular name that's always been thrown out there, and obviously with good reason there. I'm going to go to a place that seems to just perpetually churn out very productive defensive linemen, and that is the New York Giants. And I'm going with Austin Johnson, the defensive lineman there. 8th amongst interior defensive linemen and defensive stops from the article that Daniel Popper provided. 5th in tackles on run plays with 64. He had 65 tackles, guys. So 64 of those were on run stops. So that's pretty incredible. Also 3 sacks and 21 pressures as well. So he's a guy that is not just a run stuffer. He can actually get after the quarterback a little bit as well. So this is a guy, I think also he played in all 17 games as well. He's a guy that's been very, very durable as well as very productive, especially against the run. He's also very young. I think this would be a guy that if you got him on a reasonable contract, that he can step in and immediately make an impact for the Chargers against the run.
Yeah, he is a defensive lineman, so I think you'd expect probably most of his tackles to come against the run. But I do like to think that 65th tackle was, chasing down like Tyreek Hill from behind, right, is the only other non-tackle or non-run defense tackle, I should say. But yeah, I think what you're learning from this is just that there are guys out there that can help you, and there's a lot of kind of mid-level guys, especially at defensive tackle, where you can at least solidify that going into the draft, where you don't feel like you have to spend a first-round pick on one, right, or something along those lines. And you could probably bring in 2 in free agency if you.
And you probably should. You probably should, right? There's no reason why the Chargers, with the amount of cap space that they have, do not go out there and grab a couple of guys to at least add depth and quality defensive play on the interior. There's no reason why they shouldn't go out there and do that.
When he's a guy that, that has an unspectacular but very solid career so far.
Yeah.
And a guy that probably comes in on the cheap and instantly makes your run defense a little bit better. It shores things up. And I think that's the same with Sebastian Joseph Day. Neither guy is going to totally disrupt any passing attack, right? That's not what they're known for. But Sebastian Joseph Day, according to Daniel Popper, I mean, the number one run stop defender by percentage in 2021, even with the missed games that he had. Obviously, the injury concern is a little bit, but the fit makes a lot of sense. And he's still a very young player at 26, where he can come in potentially and be with you for the next 3 years, and you feel like you're still getting that top level production. Like with some of these guys, like Akiem Hicks, you're always going to be worried about, is this the year he totally regresses? And even with the injuries, he's still been a high level player, right?
Sure.
But with these guys, you don't think they're going to age out of their production like you have with some other veteran free agents. And I think that's with Sebastian Joseph today, the fit with Brandon Staley, having him in 2020, knowing he fits in well, knowing what kind of disruptor he is on the defensive line, and him having, pretty much his best pass rushing season under Brandon Staley, at least makes you feel a little bit better about that he'll be not just a run defense guy, but that is what he's going to be for the most part. And his contract, at least according to PFF, is pretty reasonable. 3 years, $24 million, $8 million in annual average value. I'd sign up for that. I mean, especially knowing, hey, you're not done at that position, but if you spend $8 million there, spread it out over 3 years, give yourself an out if things aren't working out after 2 seasons. I mean, that's definitely a chance I'd be willing to take, and also leaves you with some flexibility, right, to make other moves, bring another guy in at that position, which is what the whole point of this podcast is in particular. And I know another guy that probably fits in that same place is, maybe he's not going to be, a high-end starter, but brings you an improvement probably at the position, is a guy you were talking about. I know a guy on your list, David, Chukwuma Okarafor, the offensive tackle for the Steelers, who put together some pretty impressive numbers in 2021.
Yeah, he certainly did. I mean, only 2 sacks and over 1,000 offensive snaps is how Daniel Popper put it. To be more specific, only 2 sacks and 683 pass blocking snaps last year. So that's very, very impressive. Also, never given up more than 3 sacks in his NFL career. And I think the biggest thing here is he's under 25 years old. He's 24 and a half years old, which is really, really, really rare to have somebody who has some very decent production. Now, also, I think this obviously begs some context, right? You got to think about the type of offense that the Steelers run, or at least they have run the last couple of years, trying to get the ball out of Big Ben's hands very quickly. So a lot of that short, quick passing game, which obviously is going to help the offensive linemen out and not, make their stats look a lot better. But I think this is a guy that's not going to demand a lot. I think he could be an under the radar type of guy that you can bring in and really add some quality competition there at least. I don't think this is a contract that's going to really eat very much at all. So I think this is a very low risk, high reward type of signing.
Yeah, I mean, Big Ben, I think he got it out the quickest, if not like the top 3 quickest of any quarterback.
It's because he had to.
Season. Yeah, and I mean, that definitely helps the pressures numbers and things like that. But, I mean, Storm Norton gave up 60 pressures last year and 9 sacks. The last 2 seasons, this dude's given up 5 sacks and only 49 pressures over 2 full seasons. And he still, was a much better pass protector than Storm Norton. He does get knocked as a, poor run defender, so maybe that is something that would lead the Chargers,
run blocker,
lower the price, run blocker, exactly. But I do think that that's a guy that, why not? Like, why not? You need to bring in some kind of competition. So these are just guys you could bring in as competition that wouldn't necessarily prevent you from going to look at someone else, right? I think Bobby Massey from the Broncos is another guy like that who came in and played well for them last year, who would still, come at a very reasonable contract, you would think. Has had some durability issues, but I think you're just looking for, hey, if you can get 14 games out of a dude next season and you only need 3 games out of a Trey Pipkins, right? You can get by with that,
Yeah.
You just can't have a full season of a Storm Norton or something like that. And at the very least, these dudes are, very, very quality depth, depending on what that contract looks like. But there's some even cheaper guys, David, that I think you could add on to where you get, a BJ Hill and one of these bargain bin guys, right? You get an Akiem Hicks and one of these bargain bin guys. So we're going to talk about some really reasonable options for the Chargers that could come in and be impact players for them and also fill some big needs before the draft coming up right after this. All right, so it's time to get into our bargain bin here. And, we called Tom Telesco Coupon Tom for a long time. And I know people don't want to hear Coupon Tom right now because they're like, hey, go be Corey Linsley Tom that brought in, one of the best centers in football and made him the highest paid center in football. And I think, it's just hard to imagine, even after seeing that Tom Telesco is going to just go all out and give out these big contracts because he just cares so much about future cap and he's just not willing
It's just
to
not
kind of
who he
perform.
is. It's just not who
It
we've
is.
seen him to be.
It's against his philosophies for sure,
Yeah.
right? But there are some bargain bin guys here that Daniel Popper brought up that made a lot of sense. So we've talked a lot about, interior defensive linemen and offensive tackles, but I did think the edge rusher Lorenzo Carter was an interesting one that Daniel Popper brought in here. 26 years old, did tear his Achilles in 2020. Took some time for him to find his footing in the Giants defense last season, but had 5 sacks over his final 4 games. Those were his only sacks of the season, but that's how Daniel Popper put it. And I mean, look at it this way. The dude has 14 and a half career sacks. That's only half a sack behind Joe Chen and Nwosu for their career, right? Over those first 4 seasons. So
That's
he has
crazy.
been pretty productive. And I think for this, it's a, projected 2-year, $8 million contract. It's not going to cost a lot. Does have, is coming off an Achilles, but could potentially be that Kyler Fackrell type of player who you just bring in as depth so you don't have as big of a need at that position as you head into the draft.
I like that. I mean, and that was the guy I was looking at too as a potential guy you could add. It's just I don't know how much money I want to throw at a pass rusher that has just that limited a production and availability. Also, a little bit of concerns with the
I
injury
mean, the
issues.
limited
But
production, you want to bring back Uchenna, who only has half a sack more, right? I mean, for a much bigger number, this guy's only going to cost $4 million. Uchenna's going to cost a lot more than that.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, projected, right? Obviously, yeah. But I mean, yeah, and I think you always have to try to cast a wide net when looking for guys to add to the pass rush. So, and I've always been a guy pounding the table to add more pass rushers. So, I mean, hey, take a chance, see what you can get out of it. If this guy comes in, if you bring him in and he gets 7, 8 sacks, then I think you got to be really, really happy with that. Obviously
Yeah.
playing on a rotational basis here. I mean, I have to stick on the defensive line. I know it's boring, but it's the biggest need for the
And
Chargers.
that's
They
a lot
have
of
to
what
address it.
Daniel Popper had on his list, too. I mean, most
It
of the guys
is.
on these lists are offensive linemen or defensive linemen for the most part.
Right. And I mean, that's because Popper is a very, very smart person, and he knows that the Chargers need to continue to concentrate on improving those units. So, again, my guy here is Harrison Phillips, defensive lineman, formerly of the Bills. Here he's going to be a free agent. 49 tackles here, 21 pressures, 1 sack. So not a lot of pass rushing there, but he's only missed 5 tackles in 4 seasons. So he's pretty sure tackler there. 65 or higher run defense grade in 3 of his 4 seasons. So this is a guy who's also just a giant. Like, he's a massive human being who definitely takes on double teams very, very well, and he's able to defeat them and get those run tackles. So I don't think this is a guy that's going to cost a lot of money. He's also young, and he's been pretty productive, especially in the area that you need to improve in the most. So I think bringing in Harrison Phillips would be a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a guy that makes you sturdier right off the bat.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
He does give you a presence where he's not going to be pushed around.
That's a corn-fed country old boy right there.
Right. Not a pass rusher at
No.
all, but you need just some beef too. And that's another guy who probably comes at a reasonable contract, and a guy who couldn't get on the field for the Bills and was a healthy scratch multiple games. So like that's, they're probably not bringing him back. That's just to say that. I think another guy Daniel Popper brought up kind of fits in that same kind of category, and that's Daquan Jones from the Panthers. 30
Yeah.
years old, but would definitely bring some, give you some more girth on the inside for sure. This is what Popper says about him. They need an available, reliable, established defensive lineman, and Jones is exactly that. He has not missed a game since 2017. He has good size at 6'4", 322 pounds, and is produced as a run defender and a pass rusher. So this is an older guy, but still a guy that you would feel is still, can give you plenty of production, and you just need more of a veteran presence. And now that you don't have the Limbaugh Joseph contracts, right, and things like that in the middle, you can afford to go get a bargain bin guy, potentially like a Daquan Jones, and have him add some depth at the very least, right, and give you a rotational guy there. I do have one non-defensive lineman in corner. I think really it's 2. It's cornerbacks, Kwan Williams from the 49ers, and also Bryce Callahan, which for both of the guys, there's one big thing, and that's just they haven't been able to stay very healthy, right?
Yeah,
So
the injuries.
Of course, and that's going to be a concern. I mean, Kwan Williams, his projected contract is 1 year, $2.5 million. I saw for Bryce Callahan, it was like around $3 million. It was under $5 million for sure. So I'm not guys that are going to break the bank. What Kwan Williams brings to the table, as Daniel Popper puts, he's great against the run. He gives you a physical presence in the slot. The Chargers need help in the slot, and both of these guys are slot guys. And with Bryce Callahan, another guy, if he's, played only with really the Vic Fangio type of defense with the Bears and then with the Denver Broncos, and when he was been with Brandon Staley, or Brandon Staley's been a part of the team he's been with, he's had really good production. He's been a really good player, and I think the Chargers just at corner need a lot of depth.
Yeah, should be a scheme fit, a guy that should understand what's going on with the defense and what, Brandon Staley's asking for, who should be able to come in and provide some quality play. And we saw last year how many different times we saw corners on the football field that were never supposed to be on the field as much as they were. So to add more quality players to try to, limit that or at least offset those injuries that are eventually going to come, that can come in and provide quality play, that's always something that you should be looking to do. We know how valuable corners are. It's all about covering and rushing the quarterback. So you got to be able to cover. My last guy on my list is a guy I've talked about before. It is my only non-offensive defensive line guy. It is wide receiver Byron Pringle of the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a guy who brings in a lot of speed. I mean, he is very, very fast. He is a guy that the Chiefs used sparingly because, they got a lot of weapons over there, but he is a guy who had his best year this season. 42 catches, 548 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I don't think this is going to command a large contract either. I think this is a guy that would probably have to replace Jalen Guyton if that was the route that you were wanting to go. I think he would be a solid player, and, he's got a championship pedigree, so he knows how to win.
Yeah, that's for sure. Just as far, obviously receivers, it's always hard to argue for the Chargers to bring in free agency just because historically it hasn't worked out for them. Yeah. Another guy he brought up was Damiere Byrd, a guy who, as he put it, ran a sub 4.340 at his pro day. And, I think it is worth, sometimes taking a little flyer on a 1-year minimal deal for someone like that. And maybe the guys he has on the list are guys that probably wouldn't cost very much, probably outside of Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I think he'd probably cost a little bit more than the Chargers would be willing to spend. But it's also assuming Mike Williams is going to come back too, right? So bringing a different aspect to the offense, I would not mind. I'm not a big fan of bringing in free agent receivers, but I wouldn't mind taking a shot on one of those speedy guys. And I think just taking a shot in general, David. It'd be nice to see the Chargers take more shots on guys like an Oday Abushi, right? On guys like a Kyler Fackrell, just 1-year deals. That's what Casey Hayward was once upon a time, right? Was one of those guys where you're just taking a chance on a guy hoping to bounce back.
Take a shot in the dark, man. Give him a chance. You never know what a change of scenery, a change of voice, a change of coaching staff could do for a player's career.
100%. And like I said, the whole point of this is just that the Chargers can go out and fill multiple needs with the cap space that they have. I think it's going to go quicker than people think, but the Chargers could add 2 or 3 guys from this show, right? And I think that's where you could see them really build a foundation, especially defensively, to go into the draft in a strong place where you can take the best players available, regardless of position, and don't feel like you're pigeonholed into taking certain positions very early on. Because we just saw with, the Rams and the Bengals, big additions they made through free agency or through trades like a DJ Reader, right? And some of the guys they brought in, Trey Hendrickson for the Bengals, for the Rams, making the trade for Von Miller and all the other aggressive moves that they've had. You can fill some big holes. It still has to be your homegrown talent that puts you over the top, right? But filling in the cracks, right? Building the foundation around those guys where you have those guys already, I think is so important. He brought up another guy in Christian Ringo that at least right now, preliminarily, as we add into things, is definitely interesting just based on the fact that finished 4th amongst qualified defensive linemen in run stop percentage, according to PFF. But he was a practice squad journeyman for most of his NFL career, but he does have ties with Michael Wilhoit. The Chargers obviously have a ton of Saints ties already, mostly on the offensive side of the ball here. But I think that's another guy too, where maybe they know somebody or know they can kind of pick up on a diamond in the rough type of player that took a long time to get to where he's at now to be a rotational guy, but also, it can still bring you some value because the Chargers need a lot of help, David, especially up front. And these are all value picks that could potentially help them. The Chargers need to take some chances. Why not go with some of these guys?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of guys in here that are going to have some very, very good seasons and some guys that have already proven that they can immediately impact the areas that you've struggled the most. So I think the Chargers need to, obviously you want to go out there and get the sexy big contracts, but those obviously they're attractive, but they don't always work. We know that. But you also know that you have to supplement your roster and you need to continue to add as much talent as you possibly can. Doesn't mean you have to spend big on it, but you still need to add.
Yeah, absolutely. Enough wasn't enough last year. You went into the season knowing you had several deficiencies, especially at depth at corner, depth at safety, depth all over the field, depth on the defensive line. I mean, there was so much depth issues last season going into the season that you knew it's just, hey, if one person goes down here, that's going to severely impact that unit. You don't have somebody to come in. You can fill some of those needs this season. You can fix some of those woes this year, especially since you have, 60% of your offensive line built already, right? That you feel really, really good about. You don't have to throw everything at that side of the ball. You can go make a couple of splashes defensively. And honestly, I think dramatically improve the Chargers defense heading into the draft. You're still going to have to, hit on some more picks in the draft and get more contributions there. But it could look dramatically better when things are all said and done, out with some old, in with some new, keep some of the key players that you have to re-sign from your own internal free agents. And I think you could see such a big turnaround from that unit. I truly believe that. And I know it was very underwhelming last season. But
yeah,
tomorrow's Fan Friday, guys. And tomorrow the show turns to you guys. And you want you to get your voicemails in at 323-524-7924. And we'll also be putting a post out at Locked On LAC. And we want to also know who your number one free agent is that you guys want the Chargers to target. So hit us up in the YouTube comments. Hit us up on Twitter at Locked On LAC or at Day and Talk Sports for me on Twitter and Joe Talk SD for David Drogmeyer. As always, thank you guys for making us your first listen today and for coming in for the only Chargers daily content that you guys are going to find like this. And to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel. Follow the show for free on all platforms wherever you get your podcasts from, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and rate and review if you like the show as well. We really appreciate you guys. We can't wait to get into Fan Mail Friday with you guys tomorrow. Maybe even talk about Mike Williams and if the Chargers will franchise tag him. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.